Now this video is really worth watching.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into a pretty intense article that connects a tragic school shooting to, believe it or not, a much larger spiritual and political war. So let's break down exactly how the source material builds this powerful and, controversial argument.
And right there, that's the core of it. This is the claim that kicks the whole thing off. You see, the author, Joy Pullman of the Federalist, isn't just making a run-of-the-mill political point. No, this is theological. And our job here is to really understand the logic she's using to try and connect those two very different worlds.
Okay, so first things first, let's get a handle on the central thesis here. The source material isn't just hinting at a political motive. It's arguing there's a direct, and I mean satanic, link that connects political speech, online chatter, and the shooter's actions. It's an extraordinary claim, for sure. So let's see how the author starts to build her case.
So you might be asking, how do you even start to build an argument that huge? Well, the article doesn't start with scripture or politics. It grounds this whole thing in a very specific and very tragic event. This shooting in Minneapolis is the catalyst, the case study, for the entire analysis that's about to follow.
So everything, and I mean everything, in this argument is built on what happened at the Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. Every single detail here is treated as significant. The fact that it's a religious school, the identity of the attacker, which the source material goes out of its way to define in a very specific way. These are the crucial building blocks for the claims that come later.
Okay, so that's the starting point. But how do you get from one tragic event to this huge claim about a spiritual war? Well, the article basically constructs its case on what you could call three main pillars of evidence. Let's dig into the first one. All right, pillar number one is the shooter's own journal. The analysis doesn't just treat these writings and drawings as, the ramblings of a disturbed person. It frames them as direct testimony, evidence that supports this whole satanic thesis. The author pulls out passages just like this one, and the analysis describes these words as reading like they came straight out of the mouth of a demon, which right away you see, it sets this theological frame. We're not just talking psychology here, according to the article. This is something else entirely.
And this is where the interpretation of the details becomes absolutely crucial. A drawing of a satanic figure isn't just a footnote. It's presented as striking testimony that, and this is a direct quote from the source, makes a connection between queer ideology and the demonic. See how that works? Same thing with the gun magazine. That question, "Where's your God?" is used as more proof of a spiritual, anti-religious motive.
Okay, so that was the journal. Now let's move on to the second piece of evidence the article brings up, the online reaction to the shooting. The author argues that the way certain accounts reacted online just reinforces this idea of an attack driven by ideology. Now, to introduce this evidence, the analysis leans on reporting from another journalist, Andy Ngo. And pay attention to the language here. Using a word like ghouls right off the bat frames this whole thing in really stark, kind of supernatural, and definitely dehumanizing terms. So these are some of the direct quotes the article uses as proof that people were celebrating. The author points out that these comments read like a leftist fantasy of what an activist might say, and he uses them to build this case that this wasn't just some isolated act, but that it was actually supported, even cheered on, by a whole ideology. All right, so that's pillar two. For the third and final piece of evidence, the argument kind of zooms out. It moves away from the shooter and their online supporters and looks at the bigger public reaction. Specifically, it focuses on that big political debate that always seems to blow up around the phrase thoughts and prayers. And this slide, right here, is a perfect illustration of the article's whole method. It takes a political statement, in this case from a Democratic congressman who's clearly frustrated, and it completely reframes it through a theological lens. The logic presented in the article is basically, Satan would hate prayer, so anyone who criticizes thoughts and prayers must be, on the same side. And it doesn't stop there. The author uses that exact same lens to look at comments from other officials, like the mayor of Minneapolis. Any criticism of thoughts and prayers isn't interpreted as a call for political action. Nope, it's framed as spreading straightforwardly demonic, despairing lies. So, after laying out those three pillars, you've got the journal, the online comments, and the political reactions. The article gets to its conclusion. But here's the twist. The answer it gives isn't political at all. Instead, it offers a purely theological response, a kind of counter-narrative to what it calls demonic screeches. And this is it. This framework is presented as the ultimate answer to all the evil the author says she's identified. Notice, it's not about policy or laws, it's all about faith. It's about reframing this awful tragedy as a moment of martyrdom and even glory for the victims.
And just so there's no confusion, the article wraps up by stating its main point again, crystal clear. The author says the whole point was to draw a direct line, no ambiguity, from the words of certain political leaders and their followers straight to what the author calls satanic ideology.
And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. You know, walking through this article really shows you one powerful way a spiritual framework can be used to interpret a political and tragic event. And it kind of leaves us with a bigger question to think about. When you see arguments like this out in the world, it's worth asking, how exactly are they being framed? And what are the real implications of looking at the world through that particular lens?